Good morning, everyone. Welcome to St. Luke's Sunday Forum. I am so excited for this conversation between the Bishop of the Diocese of Atlanta, Robert Wright, and me. We want to cover a lot of ground, so hold on. Here we go. Before we get into the meat of our conversation, Bishop Wright, I want to welcome you.
Thank you, Ed. It's great to be with you, if only virtually. Always enjoy talking with you.
Thank you, my friend. Everybody listening in, Bishop Wright and I have been friends for more than 25 years. And it's really been wonderful to be in amazement at God's mysterious ways, to have him and me together again in these roles. And they are very fruitful roles for me. And I must say, before we go on, that I have all this emotion welling up in me in being in the presence of Bishop Wright, because I am a son of this diocese. It was through the ministry of Frank Allen, who later became the bishop of the diocese, that my wife Hope and I felt the warmth to come into the Episcopal Church. And it was to Judson Child that Frank Allen took me to have my first conversation about being a priest, period, and being an Episcopalian, period. And long story short, Bishop Child ordained me along with three other wonderful friends, and we don't need to get into that, but they're great. Judson married us. He ordained us to the diaconate, and then at the cathedral. And then Bennett Sims ordained me in 1983, May 19, in St. Luke's Church, with Frank Allen preaching the ordination sermon. So I have all these associations that are deeply emotional and spiritual flooding into me in this second, sitting here and talking with you, Rob. Not only do we have this personal relationship over these decades, but you sit in that seat that really made our lives kind of sing and have a cosmic click. So it's a double welcome that I extend to you this morning.
Thank you, Ed. That's I really appreciate that, and there's a great gift in being in the ministry of the bishop, because it's you get to enjoy the good work that your predecessors have done. You get to see the fruit of their hard work of faith, and also you've got an upcoming ordination anniversary, and so in advance of that, May 19th, happy anniversary for your ordination.
Thank you very much. Last year's was a big one, and I've been so focused on the crisis that I haven't even thought that my priestly ordination anniversary is coming up. Well, enough about me. Let's get to you and to the world. Another step I want to take before we get into the menu that I'm going to present to you. Just tell us a real quick sketch about your presence in the diocese. You're not a newcomer to the Diocese of Atlanta.
No, Beth and I and the kids have been here just about 18 plus years. We came from the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in Manhattan in the early 2000s. Came to serve St. Paul's as rector. Did that for 10 years, 10 wonderful, fantastic years. Learned an awful lot, had a blast, and then I've been bishop now for 8.5 years. In fact, my anniversary of my election is coming up June 2nd. So the time just keeps moving by.
Yeah. And quickly. So I welcome you to the diocese, and now you are welcoming me to the diocese. And it's just a wonderful mercy that God continues to choreograph between our lives and in life in general. Now, I am going to kind of set out a menu from which we can choose, but before we do that, I want us to have a moment about our brother who was gunned down in Brunswick, Georgia, just recently. It's a heartbreaking story. on the interpersonal and the personal level. And then it's heartbreaking and enraging and troubling on the institution, on the cultural level. And I know that you and I are close to this issue, that you've spoken out about it so much. You have sons. Can we just talk about that? What has been going on in your heart about this death?
Well, I mean, my heart, like so many other hearts, breaks at this tragic part of our American story, yet again playing itself out, where people are victimized, at least as far as we can tell preliminarily, victimized because of terrible assumptions, racial bigotry. And so this thing plays out yet again, and every time it happens, all the graves that are in our past, the wind blows over them and they become exposed again, and the bones rattle, and we find ourselves in this terrible and tragic conversation. A motherless child, on that side of it, a man who loses his life for no reason, for simply enjoying the freedom that is guaranteed to him by his God and by his country's better ideas. Another family also being destroyed because of hatred. And so what we, and apparently a legal system that did not conduct itself in the way I think that we would have our legal systems conduct themselves. I mean, 36 hours after the GBI is involved, we have an arrest, a warrant for felony murder and aggravated assault. 36 hours, and prior to that, virtually 10 weeks of inaction and misdirection. And so what we hope is that people can stay out of what I call the unproductive cul-de-sacs. So on the one hand, rage, and on the other hand, simply guilt. I think we've got to do better. We can do better than that. What I'm hoping is that people of goodwill on every side can make a mod and this story a center, and maybe use some of this energy to create. I realize that there's no hate crime statute in the state of Georgia. I realize that, and perhaps that's what we need. I realize that maybe we need to take a look at oversight, legal oversight, when it comes to these kinds of matters, and put some kind of structure so that people like Ahmaud's mother would be guaranteed some sort of additional scrutiny and process when we see this old song and dance rear its ugly head in our better Georgia.
Yeah, thank you. And you referred to him, Ahmaud Arbery. We need to call his name.
Yes.
With heartbrokenness, with prayer, and with a cry of the heart that we change things and use this moment to change things.
Indeed.
In our state.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
That deserved its own moment. So what I'd like to do is kind of set out a menu of conversational topics. One will be, and I'm just going to put 3 or 4 out here. One will be to invite you to talk about how wonderful St. Luke's is. And
very easy to do.
And how St. Luke's is one of your favorite parishes ever.
Absolutely.
But no joke, when we get back around to delving into each one of these items, to talk about, from your perspective, the unique ministry that St. Luke's offers, not only to Atlanta, but to the Diocese of Atlanta, to the state, and to the country, to the National Episcopal Church, and to the world, because we understand that, I'm thinking that this crisis is a time for us to ask some planetary questions. And what is our role in the planet cooperating with one another and our no longer degrading the planet. There are 2 or 3 other menu choices I want to put out here. David Corton has written an interesting article called Emergency and Emergence. And while we don't want to, the sun is coming in, everybody, I'm wanting to acknowledge that we're early morning Birmingham, so it'll be on up in a minute. But David Corton says, yes, we're in an emergency, and let us also understand that something new is emerging. Some people call it the reset button. Some people call it the epochal shift that we're in. So I do want to offer that in a minute for you to choose to go into. And the final thing is, pardon me, I'm doing a little Wednesday night class, and what we're doing is trying to diagram some of the really meaningful reflections that are being written about the meaning of this pandemic. And one of them is talking about how the meaning you assign to an event or a crisis is just as important as the crisis itself. And we have to lament. The Bible calls us to lament. We've got a whole book in the Bible called Lamentations. And we cannot also lament only. That it is important for us to look at what is the framework, the contextual meaning. Is it evolutionary gospel? Is it something else, the universal Christ? What is the framework? And then what are the lessons? Clearly, one of the immediate lessons is the virtual church. But what's the longer lesson about the church and the world? And then the final menu option that I'll bring up. I know this is a lot, and I know it's like a fire. I'm so sorry. But, well, I'll hold it off. Let that be the last one. So, St. Luke's, emergence, frame. Where do you want to start, Bishop?
My goodness, I think we're getting ready to write the dissertation that I need to write. No, I mean, I think it's, first of all, maybe they'll weave together, Ed. I think that I have known St. Luke's actually from before the time I came to the Diocese of Atlanta. I did CPE, some of my clinical work at St. Luke's in 1996 during the Olympics. So I've known you, worshiped there in the sanctuary, have been positively impacted by the ministry of St. Luke's for a very, very long time, and it's been important for my time. I have watched St. Luke's carefully. I've been delighted to be a part of the search work as your bishop, and I have told all of the candidates that I have interviewed with that this is an important job. And what I've said is a couple of things. I've said that, number one, this is not a job for someone who is spiritually immature or unfamiliar with how to walk and talk with an abundance of complexity being sort of the text always. Number two, I have said that this is not a congregation where people are sophisticated, and by that I mean people are working on moral and ethical business. People are in the sciences. People are excelling and have excelled, and people are leaning in to hear what is the difference making for following Jesus. And I think that is important. And I think St. Luke's has some practice at that. And I think St. Luke's is positioned to continue that conversation, how to build partners in the city, how to make the city the congregation, how to take this notion of proclamation, which we are learning more and more about in the face of pandemic, how to take that seriously and to ramp up, to scale, to talk about God and about the ministry of Jesus to one of America's most important cities, how to build a coalition of partners, how to involve the political process, et cetera, et cetera. So So yeah, I think that St. Luke's is positioned in a wonderful way to talk about why Jesus, why the Episcopal Church, why now. And in my mind, that ought to be the text every Sunday. Why Jesus? Why the Episcopal Church? Why now? Which sort of leads us into emergence and sort of leads us. I'm a great believer. Well, actually, when you look over the history of the church, and you know it very well, Ed, sometimes the church is not always on the cutting edge as much as she thinks she is.
Yes.
What ends up happening actually is that in pandemics, in all kinds of societal intersections, we find the worth, depth, and meaning of our words again. The words that the church recites over and over again at particular intersections, we realize the genius of God. We realize, for instance, in this intersection that as Dr. King said, that I use this in the sermon that folks will have already seen by now. The world house. We've understood now that yes. Wuhan is connected to Milan, is connected to Athens, Greece is connected to Athens, Georgia is connected to downtown Atlanta. Yes. And yet again, we're being reminded of that all this sort of siloed business ideologies that we create is really false, and that we really are siblings. And so Dr. King talked in terms of the world house and our radical interdependence. And we're realizing this, and not only that, this world house has an environmental system, an ecological system. And how will our great-grandchildren judge us if we don't begin to behave like we are actually co-inhabitants, siblings in a world house? And so what's emergent for me in this time right now is not underutilizing this crisis. I think that some people just want, whenever I'm able as the bishop to sound the all clear, or to guarantee a reasonable amount of safety, some people are going to want church as it always was. And I certainly understand that. And I understand the loss that people are experiencing right now. But what I would want to say is that can't be the goal. The goal can't simply to go back to the way it's always been. We are changed now. For better or for worse, we are changed now. We have learned something and are learning something. And I think, for instance, I think every church, and I think St. Luke's has been doing this, and others have been, but others are learning. We've got to realize that we've got to do proclamation in a bigger and better way always now. So there'll always be a hybrid worship option. I have talked to so many across the church, and they are realizing, even small congregations or large congregations have realized they've added hundreds, in some cases thousands, to their worshiping community on Sunday because we're doing it online. Bible studies now are having, just amazing numbers now. People are wanting the content, 30, 45 minutes once a week, wanting to take a sort of deep dive on the Gospels, or what does it mean to forgive, or what's it mean to have a Christian marriage. People are leaning in now. And so we've been invited now to figure out our delivery system issues, right? How do we get this content into people's heads and hearts so that the world is positively impacted? What's happened in COVID-19 is that all of our conversation that we've been having in the Diocese of Atlanta about innovation and adaptation, COVID-19 has put its foot on the pedal, and now all of it's accelerating. So thank God we've been talking about this already. We've sort of broken the ground in this conversation, and now people are implementing it. But I want to make sure that people understand we can't go back to the way it's always been. We're going to have to figure out how to distill some of these great lessons that we're learning now, and then add that to our repertoire going forward. Because I think the stakes are important. I think what we've learned also in COVID-19 is that we need this moral and ethical force and energy, not shy to speak up, in our society right now. So I'll stop there and let you get a follow-up in there, but that's the direction I'm going.
I love it. I just want to emphasize a theme that I heard from you just now, and that the emergence is happening right now. We're not putting the church on hold,
Yeah.
and then it's going to be a new church once we regather. We are going full throttle right now and are learning as we're moving and adapting about what the new church is going to be.
Without a doubt. I mean, I would invite people to think about Jesus walking around Galilee as someone walking and talking and figuring it out as he goes along. He's adapting. He's taking this notion of neighborliness and he's applying it to his walk. Yeah. Right? He's already, as a little boy in the temple, he's hearing all these stories about God's invitation to radical neighborliness. And then he goes out and he walks it and he talks it, and he doesn't have all the answers, but he's applying it to the leper and to the women by the well, to the woman by the well, and to young people, and et cetera. And also, we call Paul's journeys the 3 missionary journeys. I call Paul wandering around the known world trying to figure it out. Yeah. And as he's figuring it out, he's pivoting, refining, he's learning, he's failing, he's trying to figure out this stuff. So they were figuring out this thing we call church, which we think is a settled matter. They were figuring it out on the fly.
Yeah.
And I think we're being invited to do more of that now.
That is such a refreshing frame. It's a context that I haven't heard put that way. But isn't it wonderful to think about Jesus himself being in the situation that we're in now, trying to figure out this new understanding of life that he had brought out of the desert and applying it to this person and then to this person and this person. And I always loved the Syrophoenician woman who was applying it to him. And
right. That's right.
Hey, son.
That's right.
Bigger than you think it is.
That's right.
And he adapted to that.
That's right.
Oh, very.
Yeah, he had to surrender to that. Yeah.
Yes. So thanks for putting that frame on it. I love that Jesus and the disciples and the apostles and Paul were figuring it out. And
that's church. And I think that we, especially in our very settled model, and our settled model has so many advantages, and our tradition is a treasure. But if we're not careful, we'll somehow get the message that this is a sedentary, settled matter. If we're not careful, rather than I like to say, rather than rocket fuel to go out and innovate. We've got to be careful, and for that reason, without being insensitive and certainly understanding all of the loss and grief that COVID-19 has brought us, that may be one of the better learnings we get. That may be something that ends up being a gift, that we are reminded who we were always intended to be.
Exactly. And your emphasis on innovation as a part of that really excites me, Bishop. The gospel of love and grace and redemption and forgiveness and compassion being rocket fuel for us to apply to absolutely every crisis and innovate in the middle of it.
Yeah. I had a conversation with one of my favorite cohorts to talk to are men and women who are in business. Serious C-suite level people. And we had a fantastic conversation. It was with a group at Emory, and I was sort of telling them what we in the church say is our realities. Our reality is that God is real, able, good, and generous, and that everybody is made in God's image, and all of us are siblings. And so, with those 2 reality points, go do business. And to see what happens, that's an exciting idea for me. And that's our bottom line. And so everything is an iteration, innovation off of those two bits. And when we do that as the bishop, what's fascinating is that I don't have to know everything. How could I know everything? What's
Right.
exciting for me is to watch people iterate off of those 2 points
Yeah.
and come up with things I could never account for.
Yes. Well, the whole notion of that you've introduced some new vocabulary for me, that there is no such thing as the settled church, because we don't follow a settled guy.
No, at all, not at all. And Pentecost reminds us.
Yeah. And go to Galilee. There you'll find him. He's
There
still
you go.
That's the Easter energy.
Right, figure it out.
Exactly. I love that. I was in some of my readings and some of my teachings this past week. Some people were invoking Winston Churchill, who said, "Never let a crisis go to waste."
Exactly.
And that's a wonderful Easter question. Is yes, we are in a crisis, and it's going to last for a while. Let's not waste it.
Yes, exactly.
Innovate out of it. And Brueggemann, talking about newness is the sign of the presence of God. You know, that God is always fresh and doing something new.
What can we wring out of this for God and for each other?
Yeah.
Is the question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's about how do we respond? I mean, you know, I love how you have been talking with St. Luke's about big love.
Yes.
And I am reminded of a reggae song that says, "Now that you've found love, what are you going to do with it?"
Woo!
Right?
Glory.
So I think this is the question always being asked of us. I mean, I worry sometimes in our more sort of liberal and progressive pulpits. Every Sunday we talk about God's love, God's love, God's love. And of course we should, because the Bible tells us that God is love. But then the question that must always be asked is that now that you've found love, now that you are reminded that you're beloved, what are you going to do with it? I love measurables and deliverables. What are you going to do with it? You know, I remember that wonderful biblical text, and you do too, where Jesus is ascending, and all the disciples are standing around watching Jesus ascend to the Father, and then the angel comes and says, you know, what are you looking at? You know, and the sermon I always preach from that is that it's easier to gaze than to go.
Woo!
And so I think this is it, you know, and this is why you know, all the men and the women who have not gazed but who have gone are difference makers.
Yes.
And I you know, I'm hoping that COVID-19 produces a whole nother group of difference makers.
I love it. Well, that leads to that last question that I wanted to pose to you, and that has to do with the concept and the phenomenon and the dynamic of leadership, and then also the concept, dynamic, phenomenon of prophets being history changers.
Yeah.
And I'm not promoting you and me as a prophet and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about the 8th century prophets right now, and that they were the North Star for Jesus's ministry, i.e. Luke 4:18. And yet we are called into that. But first, if you don't mind, you are known. One of your brands is being a student of and an invoker of leadership. Can you talk about what that means when you think about the word leadership?
Yeah, I'll tell you. You know, I've always been intrigued. I mean, I'm ex-military, and so you know, and even way back to high school sports, always been heard the word, always been intrigued by the word. Have had the good fortune of meeting people along my journey who I would say have exerted leadership. Always have understood that leadership is more than eloquence or charisma or role. Eloquent. I mean, leadership is behavior. And so, you know, on my learning journey, spent a lot of time at the Kennedy School, Harvard Kennedy School, trying to figure out what this notion of leadership is. And so, I have a love for the Bible, and I have a love for learning. And when I spent some time learning, at the highest level about what is leadership, as I did those studies, I found that what Jesus was doing is the absolute enfleshment of those ideas. In other words, long before there was Harvard and the Harvard Review, Jesus was already doing it. And so to distill some of those qualities and to try to embody them. And so those qualities are simply leadership is a certain capacity. So everybody can lead anytime, anywhere, any place. Anybody can exert leadership. And leadership is simply about mobilizing people. It's simply about finding purpose and inviting partners to accomplish things in the face of challenges. And usually we need the best kind of leadership in issues we'd rather avoid, like race, or like economic justice, or like housing for everyone, or healthcare for everyone. Usually where we need leadership is in the most difficult subjects, issues of our day, especially the ones we want to avoid. And so we've been talking about that for a long time. And what I've come to learn is this. Leadership is a way to live out your baptismal vows. Leadership is a way to showcase love. Leadership is a set of spiritual disciplines, right? And so, some people in the church have these sort of high walls between these ideas of the church and leadership, but I just don't see that argument just doesn't stack up in the Bible. Yeah. When Jesus engages his community about its blind side and about its bias and prejudice, he's exerting leadership. When Jesus includes people on margin and says that actually this is part of the tradition, he's reclaiming the tradition, that's leadership. When Jesus mobilizes people who don't have specific training, he invites them to be partners on a grand enterprise because of a particular purpose. All of that's leadership. And so the argument that leadership, the conversation around leadership is somehow belongs, wholly to the corporate world and is not part of our spiritual conversation in the church is I'm sorry to say, it just doesn't hold water. Jesus wasn't exerting it, in particular when you look at the prophets. I love to think about what the prophets are, and you and I both know that prophet simply just means to be bearer of a word, right? And so it's to stand in a tradition, it's to bear the word of God. And so right now, even in our culture, in Glenn County, Georgia, right now, to bear the word of neighborliness radically, so that it includes the men charged for Ahmaud's murder, and Ahmaud is prophetic. To say that everybody has human dignity is prophetic. To say that we should be doing wealth better in our great country is prophetic. To say that everybody should enjoy health care in our country is prophetic. To talk about greatness in our country along those lines is not partisan. It's not even political. It is prophetic, because you and I sit under the authority of baptism. And baptism invites us, authorizes us to talk about neighborliness and love wherever we find it. So I think maybe the last thing I want to say about that is that I think what the prophet is charged to do, him or her is charged to do, and all of us really should be doing this work, is you and I have been given a glimpse at reality. And by reality, again, that God is real, able, good, and generous, and that neighborliness is synonymous with the worship of God. Yes. And so you and I have been given those coordinates to live by. And so you and I are supposed to be embodying the argument against all the ideologies that we're seduced by. National ideologies, ethnic ideologies, racial ideologies, gender ideologies, which ultimately are short-sighted, biased, and idolatrous. Yes. And so prophet, we put prophet into sort of a category of special, spiritually elite people. But that's not what was intended. What was intended is that you and I all have this word of love and neighborliness. And you and I all are supposed to call that out wherever we are, at the office, at the golf club, in school, on Zoom, wherever we see things that are perpendicular to God's reality, we're supposed to call that out and live that out. And sometimes we'll get to do that on big forums, and sometimes, mostly for us, it's in small ways.
Yeah. So, Bishop, where does the word adaptive leadership come into play?
Yeah. So adaptive leadership is a phrase that a guy by the name of Ron Heifetz is sort of synonymous with. And by adaptive, he's simply saying that there are two kinds of challenges before us always. One is a technical challenge. How will we, well, the best example of technical challenge would be if your kid has an earache, you know where to take your kid to get that solved. The doctor there has the requisite expertise to give you the medicine. We have the medicine, and in a couple of days, the problem is resolved. An adaptive challenge is a challenge, the most pernicious kind of challenge, where we don't even know what we're looking at necessarily. And there's no repository of expertise about this particular challenge. I mean, we have some approximate ideas, but we don't have a clear idea of things. And so gun violence in America is an adaptive challenge. So it defies logic. Racism is an adaptive challenge. Misogyny is an adaptive challenge, because everybody in that system, everybody in our systems has to do learning for progress to be made, right? So yes, we know logically certain things, but somehow because of familiar patterns, because of unconfessed bias or collusion, that we allow status quo to go forward unchanged. And so adaptive is the most difficult thing. And this is what we're learning in the church. The church needs to learn how to adapt, but it's locked into, again, to the stationary notion that is God, the stationary notion, when everything in the Bible tells us that actually God is on the move. And that if we're not careful, the adaptive challenge will be how to change our churches that have become museums into places that are living.
Amen.
So that's the biggest adaptive challenge. And so adaptive challenge is the heavy work, hard work, difficult, needs partnerships, needs people to even get together around tables and say, folks, what do you think we're even looking at? Adaptive challenge needs people who are willing to run experiments, and needs people who have the capacity to make mistakes together and say, we've made a mistake, and to pivot and refine. So it's really, really tough. And, we have to grow up to be able to exert that kind of leadership.
Yeah. That is such a that's so energizing for me. Thank you for going there with such energy. And it's a wonderful place for me to pose a last question that I want to bring us back to St. Luke's now.
Yeah.
And to ask the St. Luke's mission question, the St. Luke's search for a new rector question, with that context. The search committee, from whom I get very little information, have said to me that they really have appreciated recognizing that you've got a dog in this hunt. You really care about who is at St. Luke's. You really care about St. Luke's fulfilling its role in the diocese. Not that it's the only leading parish, the diocese is an ecosystem. And we, in order for the ecosystem to work, St. Luke's has got to be, all of its cylinders got to be working. So can you kind of say, in closing, how you see the mission of the diocese moving forward in light of adaptive leadership, prophetic leadership that you've been talking about? And so we're talking about big frame here.
Yeah.
And the unique kind of role that you are kind of on your tiptoes leaning in to, hoping that St. Luke's will live into.
So, yeah, I will say that. I mean, I appreciate that. First of all, Ed, let me say that I've appreciated your leadership here. I think you're exactly what the doctor has ordered. I realize we've had to extend you because of the COVID-19, and I'm glad about that, frankly speaking. I'm glad that you and Hope are here and with us and contributing, and that you have joy in what you do. It's palpable, the joy that you have in what you're doing. And so I'm grateful to God for that. What I've said to everybody, anybody who will listen, is that I'm looking for partners. So the next rector of St. Luke's should come into this diocese understanding that they're a partner, a full partner with me, someone who wants to talk about how we increase the celebrity of Jesus Christ in the city and of Atlanta and the state of Georgia. And I am wide open to having conversations about that. How do we engage partners to accomplish the work of the gospel now? And I'm not looking for a valet. I'm looking for someone who is a partner with me in their own right. I'm looking for someone, again, who is an able communicator of the gospel, someone who wakes up on their own time and is thinking about this. What does the gospel look like in the 21st century? I'm looking for that. I have a vested interest because, of course, the next rector of St. Luke's is going to be, a partner not only with me but with other people in the diocese. And what would it be like if Episcopal became synonymous increasingly with the people who are serious about the intersection of spirituality and science and economic justice and excellence and business and all of that, and all while being a fun group? What would that be like if you and I, during our time together in this diocese, could raise the floor height of that? And here's what I really believe. I believe that our church, not to the detriment or making disparaging comments about anybody else, but I believe that our tradition, we've got the treasure. And I believe the way in which we believe this big God underneath this big tent where all are welcome is pitch perfect for right now. And I'm just looking for some partners to help me really get that word out and to manifest that in concrete ways. And so I'm excited about St. Luke's being at this intersection. Let me say lastly that more than 150 years ago, this church decided not to leave the city. And I think that is an important piece of data and an important identity marker. And so that spirit then, what is it doing now? How can we harness that good energy, that good stewardship, that faithfulness for now? And so, the pattern, the energy, the emphasis is not really even in the new rector or even in the bishop. It's in the people. And so if we can sort of reclaim what's already there, maybe with new vitality, with the add value of a new rector and an add value of an interim rector, and maybe even an add value of a bishop partner, then I think we have a winning recipe.
I love that. My heart is swelling so much. God inside me has doubled in size just from hearing you. It has been so wonderful to be with you, Rob Wright. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your personhood. Thank you for being a learner. Thank you for being an innovator. Thank you for being a supporter of St. Luke's. We love you and we appreciate your prayers. It has been a great time to be with you.
Thank you, Ed. I do appreciate all that you've done. I appreciate these kind of forums. I think they're wonderful. Thank God for Hope. Hope Bacon, I'm talking about. Hope in general, of course, but Hope Bacon, I'm talking about in particular, who is your partner in your ministry. Thank God for her.
Yeah, she's a joy. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate your being with us. Next Sunday, we will be talking with two of our partners on this Campus of Miracles, Tony Johns and Kate Kennedy, about Crossroads Ministry and Ansley School. And then the following Sunday, we'll be talking with three other leaders about the rest of the 5 agencies that are on this Campus of Miracles. We're going full force with all of these forums, and we're thrilled you were here. Thanks again, Bishop Wright.
Thank you, Ed. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.